Okay, folks, this
Got it.
is Bentonville Film Festival interview number 2 with Mr. Carlos Cardona. Did I say that right?
Mundo.
Okay, this is good. Okay, I want to start out right out of the gate because I've been doing some investigating. I have to say that one of the coolest things about you, I love the pictures that say influenced by Sophie or current whatever. Tell me a bit about the Sophie pictures. If you go on your Instagram, I keep seeing Sophie popping up and I'm like, how cool is that? You take some seriously wicked photographs.
Yeah, so my Instagram is probably the most comprehensive view into my personal and artistic life. And so for the last 11 years that I've had my Instagram, it's been sort of like an ongoing like art project slash personal photo journal. I'm also a photographer, not professionally a photographer. I mean, I do sometimes get hired as a photographer, but photography is my hobby. And most recently, I've been shooting a celluloid 35 millimeter photography, and that I develop and scan at home. So it's sort of like, yes, it's my hobby, but also as a filmmaker, it's an extension of my craft.
Oh, you bet. Absolutely. I want to talk a bit about the 35 millimeter and 16 millimeter. I've seen that you've shot in those different, using those different types of cameras. And that's not common, I think, for the average filmmaker. So why utilize those sorts of tools? And more importantly, how do you feel that those measure up against today's technology?
My project Chiqui that's here at the Bentonville Film Festival was shot entirely on 16 millimeter. I try as much as I can, both in my professional, so my day job is I'm a cinematographer. I work specifically in documentary, which is almost impossible to shoot a documentary on 16 millimeter if it's not like recreations or any kind of B-roll. But for the narrative stuff or things that are unscripted, that are not as comprehensively documentary, I try to shoot 16 as well. I try to advocate for celluloid as much as I can, just because this medium that I work in was founded on celluloid, and I just think that even though we've come a very long way in digital technology that has trying and is that's the whole point of all of these cameras, like say like the Alexa or the Red or whatever is the most popular digital cinema camera at the moment. They all try to emulate film and celluloid, and we've come a long way. And sometimes it is, some people can't tell the difference, but if you side by side put image, a celluloid digital image to a common person, they may not be able to describe it, but they'll say this one, when they look at the film, like this one feels different, looks different. I think that's still true. I think digital hasn't replaced film yet. So as much as I can, I try to use film, and I just think it is cinema. So anytime that I can do it, I will.
Now, you've been referred to as a do-it-yourself filmmaker, which I think is awesome. I'm all for like guerrilla filmmaking, doing it on your own, learning it on your own, etc. However, there's a whole other side of the fence of filmmakers that have very extensive training, etc. So talk to me a bit about that, especially because new filmmakers will watch this interview. What would you recommend? Would you say it's best to have a combination, or can you be a do-it-yourself filmmaker and succeed as you are?
I went to film school at New York Film Academy from 2008 2009. I'm 34 years old, so I came up in a time where we were at the dawn of DSLR filmmaking, which completely revolutionized and democratized filmmaking as a craft. And so in the past, there was a lot of, it's either you were a director or a cinematographer, or you were a production designer, or you were a producer. And it was very seldom that you have someone that did it all themselves, because the tools and the technology 25 years ago were still not as readily available and as user friendly as it is now. With the advent of digital cinema, of mirrorlesses and DSLRs, linear editing software like Adobe Premiere and Final Cut 7, and even Avid now is becoming more accessible. And with the advent of After Effects and all of these user-friendly softwares that have come out that you can do the effects on, sound engineering on, it's become very easy, not easy, but it's become accessible to pretty much be everything, a do-it-yourself filmmaker. And so I think that newer filmmakers or younger filmmakers of the coming generation, being a multifarious filmmaker, being able to shoot your projects, produce your projects, edit your projects, it's super important, because without those tools and without those skills, I don't think I would have gotten to the place where I'm at now. So I highly encourage everyone to learn at least a little bit of of the trade of each and every department. Whether you're a cinematographer or director, it's important to have your hands in all of the departments.
Now, some filmmakers that I speak to, and you're a perfect person to ask because you're very heavy into cinematography and the technical side of things. But as we all know, filmmaking isn't just that. As you mentioned, there's writing and there's editing and then there's production. But more importantly, there's budget, things like marketing and promotion and getting the money for things. So we're always looking for new and innovative ways to raise money to make our next project. So any good tips, anything you could pass along?
So my project Chiqui was completely self-financed by me by doing a lot of, for hire work as a freelancer. And so it was a big risk that I took financially to come out of pocket. Unfortunately, a lot of independent filmmakers either have to resort to their own funds. And if they don't have privilege or the resource to come out of pocket, they usually crowdfund. They have people that invest in their films. Obviously, working within the parameters of your budget, of your resources is really important. However, I think what's most paramount of everything, out of all of that, is having your film family. My project would not have been possible without the love and support and attention of my producers, Sophia Devon, Daniel Pfeffer, and my cinematographer, Rand Rosenberg, who I consider my film family. And we shoot projects for each other. We produce projects. We go back and forth. We trade off. And I think that's the most important part, is having a community, is having a film family that will support you, that will come out for you. Because no matter, even if you have a real budget or a budget that can facilitate a production, you can't pay someone enough to care and love and truly support your project. So having those kind of people in your corner is the most important thing, next to having the money and the resources to make your film.
Oh, absolutely, without a doubt. And so in your case, I've seen that you've directed 8 times, you've got 7 cinematography projects, and then 4 for writing, and then of course, 1 for acting. I found that rather interesting that you're very cosmetic, friendly as far as the camera goes. So why just the 1 acting project?
So I acted in I think I was literally a background actor in one of my own projects that I made a long time ago, that fortunately is not on the internet anymore because it's pretty embarrassing, but the IMDb credit still lives. My parents are Colombian. I'm 2nd generation Colombian American, and Latinos there's something about us that we're very performative and we're very tragic and comedic. We're just very passionate people. So there is definitely a histrionic thespian side in me that I both in my personal and in my film life that I have, but I just never came across the opportunity to act in a film. I would like to at some point. However, the filmmaking machine and the filmmaking process is still so embedded in me that it'd be really hard for me to break that, or to be free from that, to be able to act, because acting is an extremely difficult thing to do. And even though I consider myself an actor's director, I think that I'm still tied to the shackles of filmmaking and technical stuff. But I would like to at some point.
I figured that, because I'm like,
I haven't had the opportunity or the need for me to act in my own projects, just because I've been fortunate to know so many great actors and so many great artists and performers. So
I had saw on social media that it wasn't so long ago that you had a screening of Chiqui at Southampton, New York, which is of course where you're from. Yeah. So how surreal was that for you? And more importantly, tell people, I think when people think New York, they automatically think Manhattan, Soho, etc. So that's a very different part of New York, is it not?
Absolutely. So New York is an immense state that it's so diverse, both geographically and politically and socially. So, New York City is like the hub of New York to a certain degree. No, yes, it is, not to a certain degree. And then there's Long Island. So I grew up in Southampton, which a lot of people are always like, wait, you grew up in Southampton? Like, oh, you must be rich. Or they just don't believe that actual people live in the Hamptons. Yeah, there are actual, working class, the middle class is slowly evaporating in this country. But at one point, once upon a time, there was a substantial middle class population in the Hamptons. My parents being one of them that happened to carve out their own version of the American dream. They were able to purchase a home and start a business, which is very, very rare for Latin American immigrants at the time, but they were able to achieve that. And so my parents were the ones who worked for the rich people in the Hamptons. I grew up in that environment where there weren't that many Latino kids or 2nd generation immigrant kids. And so my experience growing up in the Hamptons was fraught with a lot of tension and a lot of rebellion. I was a punk rock skateboarding kid growing up in the Hamptons, and I disavowed my hometown for a long time. I eventually left and went to New York City. I was recently invited to screen Chiqui as part of the Sag Harbor Cinemas.
Oh, nice.
So there was a cinema that had been there for years that had burnt down in 2017. So they reconstructed it, and this was their sort of inaugural screening of local talent, and that was very surreal for me to go back to my hometown of the Hamptons, considering, or despite all of the controversy that I had growing up there, to be invited and to be recognized as a local, burgeoning talent. It was pretty surreal for me for the conversation and for the sentiment to be in my favor for once in the Hamptons. So it was pretty cool to do that. We had our world premiere at Sundance, which unfortunately was the in-person was canceled, which was a big break for me, a big step in, like a dream come true for a project that about my parents, that they would see it in Park City, which is like the goal for every independent filmmaker to be a part of Sundance. But they were fortunate enough to be able to see it last month at the Los Angeles Latino Film Festival in LA. We had our screening at the Chinese Theater, which is the movie theater in Hollywood. It was a really amazing experience for them to be able to see Chiqui in the big screen, and yeah, it was amazing.
So Chiqui is a 30-minute movie that you have wrote and directed, of course. So I've got a bunch of different questions. Now, when you premiere at Sundance, I presume that everybody's hot on the trail and you must have like 75 screenings. I want to talk about this because I know that obviously when you get to the premiere festivals, everyone kind of expects this very large, huge run and you'll be all over the place. Is that the case necessarily? Because I tend to think it's just great storytelling that everyone will want to watch.
Having our premiere at Sundance definitely got a lot of eyes on the project. A lot of people reached out to me in the industry, were very interested in the project as a series, but also, it's given us the opportunity to be invited to screenings outside of the film festival circuit, like the Sag Harbor screening that I mentioned in the Hamptons. And we were invited to the Bentonville Film Festival, which we're currently at right now.
Right.
And it's just, it's one great festival and festival experience after another. And our festival run isn't over yet, so we're still waiting to hear from a few more festivals. But yeah, it's been an amazing opportunity to start at Sundance and then branch out to other festivals and networks.
Sure. And I think it's important to note, of course, that this isn't a film. So it was a project that you shot that you're developing into a TV show, or TV series, I should say. So talk to me a bit about the process of writing something like that, because clearly writing a film, writing a play, writing something else is very different. In some ways, was it easier or harder for you because you have a personal connection?
So originally, Chiqui was supposed to be a proof of concept for a feature. But then, when we started writing it and when we started really developing it, I don't think that my parents' story, it wouldn't do it justice for it to just be a feature. So we decided for it to be a television series. So what we did is we wrote what would be the first 3 episodes of the first season into our pilot, which is a proof of concept. What you've seen and what was premiered at Sundance and here at Bentonville is a proof of concept. So if we were to get picked up by a network or whoever, we would reshoot the pilot. In terms of writing it, it was not that it was easy, but there was just so much story and so much things that I wanted to say about my parents' experience that couldn't fit into our pilot. But it was amazing writing it through and through. So I wrote it all in English first, and when I went to translate it in Spanish, when I showed it to my actors, who Chiqui is 95% Spanish.
Right.
They were like, wait a minute, this doesn't sound like what we talked about and how we talked about the film sounding like and being like, because a lot of, if you're not a Spanish speaker, you won't really understand this. But if you are, a lot of the Spanish colloquialisms, a lot of the sayings and the speech is very much 1980s Spanish, Colombian Spanish. So it was funny because I'm fluent in Spanish. I learned from my mother, and so some things that I say, some certain little regionalisms or maxims or little things that I say are very much still steeped in the 1980s. But when I went to write it, I still wrote it like in a very traditional Spanish way. So what I had to do is I had to ask my mother to help me rewrite the Spanish script with the sayings and with the accurate Spanish that was spoken at the time. So that was kind of interesting. That my mother was in a way a ghostwriter.
That's cool.
On Chiqui.
Now let's talk about the characters a bit. In the beginning, you see this lovely little couple together and everybody's happy and it's kind of Shangri-La like. And then of course they immigrate from one place to another. They come to the city, actually in Montauk they end up at, and things turn very differently very quickly. And from a reviewer perspective and a judge perspective, one of the things I was thinking is, it's like you're rooting for one, then rooting for the other, and you're almost kind of rooting for both of them. There are shades and moments, I think, where she's not the nicest gal in the world, and honestly sometimes he's not the nicest guy. You feel badly that it's kind of their move to make something better has almost made things worse, if you will.
It's interesting that you say that. So I think that I have very seldomly seen film or a show or a piece of media about immigrants that allows immigrants to be complicated in that way, to be three-dimensional in that way, where you're not just rooting for them because there are these like naive immigrants who they're here for a better life and you know we want them to succeed and et cetera, et cetera. You know, my parents could have they could have stayed in Colombia, and despite what was happening in the country at the time in the late 80s. You know, there was the drug trade, there was Pablo Escobar, there was a lot of violence and political turmoil. My parents, you know, they were comfortable in Colombia, but like everyone that comes to this country, to the United States, you know, we're still fascinated by America because it's such an anomaly. It's such an enigmatic place that we all want to. It's hard to describe. You know, people want to move here, and so my parents were one of those people. And so I've very seldomly seen stories of immigrants that come here, like my parents did. Very seldomly have I seen a Latino female character that is complicated, like Chiqui. That is, you don't know whether to like her, whether to root for her. It's complicated, and I like that complexity, and I haven't seen that, and which is part of the reason why I set out to make it, because I wanted to see my parents and my experience represented, because I have not seen that.
The other thing I noticed too is that there's a predominant theme here that I'm noticing, in that no matter how hard they try, it almost appears as if they are looked at as second class or looked at as inferior. Was that intentional, or was that more left open for interpretation? Because that does seem predominant throughout the entire 30 minutes.
No, yeah, absolutely. I think that, you know, immigrants that move here who don't have the English language down pat, or they don't have a solid and stable career, of course, they're always going to be looked down at. There's a lot of classism, especially in the Hamptons, that still pervades throughout the whole tapestry of the Hamptons and of that era of New York. And so, yeah, of course, there's always that layer or that level of viewing or viewing someone or looking down at someone. So yeah, you're right about that.
The other cool thing I noticed, in case not everybody pays attention when you watch the film, at the very, very end, I love the whole scene where she walks in, she opens up the freezer, and sure enough, it says American Dream Poultry right on it. I'm like, how priceless is that? How hard was it to pull off something like that? Because I'm thinking, that's deliberate, of course, but I'm like, how do you create that moment like that? That was so priceless. I'm like, so fit, so well.
I don't know. I think that was just part of. It was a little to do something like that, because it's so on the nose, and it's definitely a very obvious symbolism. But I think that having that kind of overt expression lent itself to the piece as a whole, because, you know, Chiqui views her life as a music video. That even from the beginning, the montage is very much like a music video.
Right.
Her obsession with, you know, American television and magazines and this kind of stuff with Madonna and all these things, it's part of that superficial fabrication of the American dream. And something like that, saying American Dream Poultry, is part of that mosaic.
And it was, I mean, the symbolism was just so serene and surreal. I was like, this is just so on the nose. The biker thing took me a little off guard. I was like, wow, I was so not expecting that. Where did that come from?
Part of Chiqui's idea of the American dream, you know, so my mother and Chiqui character, you know, she came of age in the early 70s, where, you know, rock and roll, what was emblematic of rock and roll was like this American blonde guy with hippie with like long hair on a motorcycle, sort of like, you know, Easy Rider, Dennis Hopper and Peter Fonda. That was what, for a lot of people of my mother's generation, what symbolized like freedom and the hippie movement and America and rock and roll. And so, you know, for Chiqui, that's what America is. We as, you know, part of the American myth is like the open road, the vehicles, the motorcycle. So for her, that's what it meant to be American. You know, the character of Joe at the end of the film, the biker with the long hair, which is my really good friend Shane Herrick. We needed to have that personality as part of the film, both as a commentary on Chiqui's obsession with American culture, but also really digging deep in the sense of a lot of people thinking that this kind of mythic American character, this like American, you know, white savior person was like, this is what propelled their American dream. So it's a commentary on that. And it's interesting because it's a lot of people think that it's like, is that an actual person? Did she like run away with this man?
Right.
Like, you know, or is it a figment of her imagination? Which to me, it's truly a figment of their imagination. But I love how that is a point of conversation for people who watch the film.
Oh, you bet. It opens up for a lot of conversations, to tell you the truth. Actually, the one big question I like to ask filmmakers is if I gave you 3 sentences to describe your film to my audience, tell them what Chiqui's about.
Chiqui is poetic, thought-provoking, and controversial.
Ooh,
I would say.
good.
I think for a lot of Latin American people who watch the film, the Chiqui character is a polarizing character. A lot of Latin American people have ideas of how an immigrant should compose themselves while they're in the United States or when they move to a different country. And there's a lot of double standards for women of a certain generation. And also on the opposite side with Carlos, male figures, male Latin figures, the idea of viewing a male figure, a paternal figure, as being vulnerable or weak or susceptible is incomprehensible for a lot of men of that generation. So I think when people watch Chiqui, it will start a lot of conversations, specifically if you are Spanish speaking or if you are from Latin America, as to it challenges and it deconstructs a lot of gender roles and gender stereotypes of Latin American people. So when I say it's controversial, I really mean that, because it is definitely a point of contention for some people.
Now, I know that this is available through the Bentonville virtual portal right now, so people can watch it. Where is it headed next, live screening wise?
As of right now, we don't have any upcoming festivals, but it will be screening on August 5th in New York City and Brighton Beach as part of not really a film festival, but a film screening of New York City town. So.
Any future project, anything else that you're promoting or working on right now, film wise or otherwise?
Currently, we're trying to make Chiqui into a series. We're talking to a few networks and some production companies and producers that may want to incubate us. But I also have a background in narrative film, which Chiqui is narrative. But I've directed 2 features and shorts, so I'm currently developing a few features that are also in the vein of autofiction or autobiographical film, very much like Chiqui. So that's
awesome.
What's happening at the moment.
That's awesome. Now I'm going to read off a bunch of places where people can find you. And then when I get done, just let me know if I missed anything. Your website, of course, is Carlos, and I'll spell that. That's CARLOS, Cardona, CARDONA films.com. You are also on Instagram with same said name, IMDb, LinkedIn, Vimeo, as well as on Facebook. Anywhere else people can find you?
So that covers I'm on Facebook, but who uses Facebook anymore?
Well, yeah.
That's right. I'm all the social media platforms. TikTok, that's definitely a generational gap for me. I'm on TikTok, but I don't really TikTok as much as I should. I respect it. I respect it.
I get you. My final question for you, I think, is probably one of the more important ones, especially nowadays as far as today goes. I know that you are a man that is very heavy on covering stories that look at identity and race and class. Talk to me a bit about that choice, meaning that some people might say that that's a bit controversial, a bit murky, and moreover, a bit complicated. Why do you cover stories that pertain to those subjects?
Because I am a second generation Latin American person. I am a person of color. I am part of, historically a marginalized group of people that have not had the opportunity to tell stories that deal with race, with class and identity. I very early in my career, I strayed away from that and I tried making genre films, film noirs, crime thrillers that had nothing to do with any of what I'm exploring now. And I think I have the rare privilege and opportunity to be a filmmaker, to be in dialogue with the contemporary cinema to a certain degree. Not as much. I'm definitely not in the vanguard as a lot of other filmmakers, but I'm getting towards that level. So I feel it very important for me to address these things, to make films that open up a dialogue for the inequities and the discrepancies of people who don't have a platform to say anything or to express themselves on such a large scale. So yeah, I do. Yes.
Hugely important work is what you do. That's awesome. Yeah. Wasn't he amazing? Thank you so much. This has been absolutely lovely. I appreciate you taking the time to talk to me. And thanks so much. I know you will be very successful. This film is just absolutely beautiful on many, many levels. So I appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.